An entire village vanished from every historical record. This is the mystery of the time-lost forest village, a community that once thrived in a medieval wilderness before it was wiped clean from memory. By the end of this journey, you will discover the shocking truth of how a whole settlement can be erased from history. We will uncover why its name was purged from every map and ledger, and what its silent story reveals about the dark pressures of the medieval world. What does the disappearance of one small village tell you about the fragility of our own history? The immense woods of medieval Europe were a world of their own. Sunlight struggled to pierce the canopy of ancient oaks and beeches, casting the forest floor into a perpetual, dappled twilight. In the stillness, every cracking twig and distant animal cry was amplified, feeding legends of wolves, outlaws, and things far older. This was not merely a setting for our story, but a central character, a living entity that both nurtured and threatened. For the people carving out a life on its edge, the forest was their larder, providing timber, game, and forage. It was also their greatest adversary, a shadowy realm of unknown perils that demanded constant respect. Our lost village was one of these fragile footholds, a tiny island of human order in a vast and untamed green sea. Its location would have been a carefully chosen mosaic of resources and defenses, a nearby stream for water, a clearing for crops, and the dense, surrounding woods for shelter and hunting. Yet this same geography that offered protection also guaranteed isolation. Thick woodland and treacherous, waterlogged bogs acted as natural walls, keeping the wider world at bay. It is within this intimate, demanding relationship with the forest that we find the first clues to the village's ultimate fate. To understand how a community could simply vanish, we must first understand the very nature of these frontier settlements and the precarious thread by which they always hung. The first tangible clue to this village mystery is a profound silence found on parchment and vellum. It is absent from every known medieval map, from the most detailed monastic cartularies to the exhaustive surveys of royal estates. In an age where land was the ultimate measure of wealth and power, and every productive acre was meticulously recorded for tax and control, this omission is not just a gap. It is a deafening void. Consider the famous Go map of Great Britain, created in the late 14th century. This remarkable document is so precise that it records tiny hamlets, individual manor houses, and even specific bridges across the realm. For our village to be missing from such a comprehensive record is deeply suspicious. It means this was not a simple cartographic error, a place simply overlooked by a tired scribe. This silence is deliberate. Someone with considerable authority went to great lengths to ensure this community was scrubbed from the official memory of the world. The empty space on the map is not passive. It is an active erasure, a chilling testament to a powerful agency that wanted this place forgotten. This leads us to a disturbing and unavoidable question. What political or religious power in the medieval world had both the motive and the absolute authority to make a village simply disappear from history? This feudal silence is the loudest clue we have. Every medieval community, no matter how remote, was bound within a strict hierarchy of obligations and protections. A village without a lord was like a ship without a captain, an unthinkable and dangerous anomaly in a world ordered by loyalty and land. Our lost settlement presents a profound paradox. It must have had a feudal superior, a local lord, a bishop, or an abbot to whom its people owed their taxes and their labor, yet that authority is a ghost. No surviving charter mentions its lands, no pipe roll, those meticulous royal accounting records, ever tallied the taxes it should have paid. this is not a simple oversight. It is a void with terrifying implications. Was this village a rare and radical example of a free community, one that managed to operate entirely outside the feudal web? In a society built on the premise that everyone served someone, such independence would have been seen as a direct threat to the entire social order. A single free village could inspire others to seek the same liberty, unraveling the very fabric of control. Alternatively, the lord of this village may have been a figure of immense power who fell into utter disgrace. Perhaps a noble family was attainted for treason, their lands and titles stripped away and their names systematically purged from all records. In such a purge, every trace of their holdings, including our distant village, would have been wiped clean as if they never existed. To understand the gravity of this, we must feel the weight of the feudal yoke. The villagers would have owed their lord a portion of every harvest, a tax on every animal born, and a share of any meager profit from crafts. More burdensome than taxes was the corvée, the compulsory labor. For weeks each year, the villagers would not work their own fields. Instead, they would be forced to repair the lord's castle, build his walls, or maintain the roads that connected his other estates. Their own survival was secondary to his demands. A village operating outside this system was not just avoiding taxes, it was declaring itself sovereign, a tiny island of defiance in a sea of obligation. This feudal anomaly points toward a deeper, more dangerous truth. Why would a community risk everything for such autonomy? The answer may lie not in politics, but in faith. What unique beliefs, what heretical practices might have taken root in that isolated forest clearing, creating a people who answered to a higher authority than any earthly lord? While official records offer only a chilling silence, the human heart tells a different story through whispers on the wind. Local folklore surrounding the ancient woods preserves a strange and persistent legend, a tale of a village that the earth simply swallowed whole. Other stories speak of a hidden hamlet of the good folk, a place mortals could only stumble upon by accident and never find again. These are not historical documents, but they are a powerful form of memory, an echo of a real event that has been filtered through generations of storytelling. The image of the earth swallowing a settlement is particularly telling. It points directly to a sudden, catastrophic geological event. A massive landslide, triggered by relentless rains, could have buried every timber-framed home and cobbled path in an instant. Alternatively, the region's treacherous bogs might have liquefied in a rare seismic event, engulfing the entire village in a hungry, shifting mire. Such a disaster would have been so absolute and so swift that it would indeed have seemed as if the ground had opened its mouth and consumed the community. Yet the other folktale of the elusive hamlet of the good folk carries a more symbolic weight. In European tradition, the good folk or fairies were often used as a metaphorical stand-in for communities that lived apart, that followed different rules or held strange beliefs. A village that practiced a faith deemed heretical by the church, or one that stubbornly maintained its pre-Christian traditions, might well be remembered by fearful outsiders not as a group of people, but as something otherworldly and fey. Their isolation and secrecy would have bred rumor, transforming them in the popular imagination from human neighbors into mystical beings you might only glimpse by chance. This folkloric echo is our second crucial clue. It confirms that something profound happened in that forest, an event so significant it burned itself into the region's collective consciousness for centuries. The official record may have been purged, but the memory refused to die, instead transforming into myth. This gives us two distinct paths to investigate, one of catastrophic geology and another of radical belief. The true story likely lies at the intersection of these two possibilities, where a real disaster was used as a convenient cover for an even deeper truth. The air inside a longhouse would have been thick with the scent of wood smoke and baking bread. Picture a single, sturdy structure built from timber felled from the surrounding forest, its roof a thick blanket of thatch. This was not just a home, it was the heart of a family's world, sheltering both people and their precious livestock under one long, smoky roof. Outside, in cleared patches of earth wrestled from the woods, the villagers grew hardy grains like rye and barley, the staples that formed the bedrock of their survival. Their true wealth, however, likely roamed freely through the trees. Pigs, the quintessential medieval forest animal, would have been their primary livestock, fattening on acorns and roots, a living larder that required little more than the woodland's natural bounty. This was a life built on a delicate, daily dance with nature. While men might have practiced the skilled crafts of the forest, like coppicing trees to ensure a sustainable supply of wood or burning charcoal for fuel, women's work centered on transforming these raw materials into life. They managed the ever-burning hearth, brewed the weak ale that was safer to drink than water, and spun wool or flax into the cloth for their family's clothing. Every task was essential, every hand was needed. This profound self-sufficiency was the village's greatest strength. It allowed them to exist, perhaps for generations, with little need for the outside world. They could produce their own food, their own tools, their own clothing. Yet this very independence was also their most dangerous weakness. A community that needs nothing from the wider feudal system is a community that owes nothing to it. This isolated self-reliance would have made them an object of suspicion, or worse, a target. How long could a pocket of quiet autonomy last in a world that demanded obedience and tribute? The answer may lie not in their daily routines, but in what they believed, in the secrets they may have kept close within their forest sanctuary. But history's most stubborn witness is the earth itself. Our third and most tangible clue comes not from faded ink or whispered tales, but from the soil. Modern archaeology has finally given a shape to the silence. Using a technology called light detection and ranging, scientists have scanned the ancient forest from the air. This method bounces laser light off the ground, piercing the thick canopy to map the subtle contours of the land beneath. And there, hidden for centuries, they found the village's ghost. The scans revealed faint, rectangular shadows etched into the subsoil, the unmistakable platforms where longhouses once stood. They traced the linear depressions of old trackways, the very paths the villagers walked every day. Most telling of all were the clear ridge and furrow patterns of their field systems, the fossilized imprint of their labor still pressed into the ground. These are the village's true fingerprints, preserved long after its name was forgotten. Ground-penetrating radar and careful excavations could tell us even more. They might locate the dark stains of post holes showing the exact footprint of a home. They could find the stone-lined hearth that was the heart of a family, and the refuse pits filled with broken pottery and animal bones, the mundane debris of daily life. This silent testimony in the soil allows us to map the village's entire layout and estimate that perhaps 100 souls lived there. We can see it now not as a legend but as a real physical place. And this physical evidence raises a chilling new question about its final moments. The layout shows no signs of a frantic battle, no evidence of fire or violent destruction. The houses stand orderly, the fields are neat. This suggests an ending that was either devastatingly swift, like a natural disaster that left no time for panic, or one that was strangely peaceful, as if the people simply left. What could compel an entire community to abandon their homes, their fields, everything they had built without a fight? The answer may lie in what they left behind, or more importantly, in what they took with them. A plague pit tells a silent, brutal story. Imagine a single, large trench dug in haste, filled not with individual graves but with a tangled community of bones, a final, desperate act by the few survivors of a village ravaged by disease. This is the grim signature of the Black Death, and it offers one of the most compelling explanations for our vanished village. In the mid-14th century, this pandemic swept across Europe with terrifying speed, wiping out as much as half the continent's population. In such a remote, isolated community, the impact would have been absolute. There were no doctors, no medicines, and no escape. The disease would have burned through the settlement like a fire, killing so many so quickly that the few left alive could no longer sustain the community. They would have buried their dead in a mass grave, a plague pit, and then simply walked away, abandoning their homes to the encroaching forest. The land, now empty and silent, would have legally reverted back to its feudal lord. But if that lord was distant, or if his own estate was later consumed by war or his own records lost, the memory of this one small, devastated holding could have easily faded into nothing. This is a clean, tragic, and historically common end. Yet for our village it feels incomplete. While the Black Death created thousands of what medieval clerks called wasted or deserted manors, those places were still recorded. They were noted as empty, as taxable units that had once produced income but now yielded nothing. Their names were written down as a memory of a loss, not erased as if they had never been. Our village suffers from a different fate. It is not listed as deserted. It is not listed at all. This crucial distinction points a finger away from mere tragedy and toward something more deliberate. The plague may have been the tool that emptied the village, but it was likely a human hand that then seized the opportunity to scrub its very name from the world. What secret did that empty village hold that made its complete oblivion so necessary? A chapel spire was the compass needle of the medieval soul, pointing every community toward heaven. In a world defined by faith, the parish church was the center of life, the keeper of time, and the official witness to every human milestone from baptism to burial. For our lost village to have no spiritual footprint whatsoever is a silence that echoes louder than any missing tax record. Its name is absent from every diocesan register, every list of tithes paid to a bishop, and every record of a priest's appointment. This is not an oversight, it is an impossibility unless the village existed in a state of deliberate spiritual separation. Consider the implications. Every soul in Christendom was accounted for within the parish system. The tithe, a tenth of one's harvest or income paid to the church, was as non-negotiable as feudal taxes. A village that paid no tithes was a village in open rebellion, not just against a lord, but against God himself, at least in the eyes of the powerful church authorities. This ecclesiastical void forces us to confront a startling possibility. The people of this forest community may have practiced a faith that placed them firmly outside Orthodox Christianity. They could have been adherents of an older, pagan belief system that had stubbornly survived in the deep woods, or perhaps they followed a radical Christian sect deemed heretical. Groups like the Cathars or the Waldensians were brutally persecuted for their unorthodox views, and entire communities that sheltered them were often eradicated. A village operating as a secret haven for such beliefs would have been a glowing ember of defiance in the eyes of the church, a threat that needed to be extinguished completely. To erase such a place from history would not just be a political act, it would be a holy one, cleansing the world of a spiritual infection. This final clue, the missing church, ties all the others together. The feudal silence makes sense if the Lord was a heretic himself, or if the village's radical autonomy was rooted in unorthodox faith. The folklore of the otherworldly good folk perfectly describes how orthodox neighbors might view a community practicing strange rituals behind a veil of trees. And the archaeological evidence of a peaceful abandonment could point to a quiet exodus, a flight from impending persecution. The village did not just vanish, it was unmade, its memory purged from both royal and heavenly ledgers to ensure its dangerous ideas died with it. A pocket of heretical belief in the medieval world was a threat that demanded absolute eradication. Think of the immense power of the medieval church, an institution that governed not only the path to salvation but the very structure of daily life. Its authority was universal and non-negotiable. Now, imagine a small community deep in the woods that quietly, stubbornly rejected that authority. Perhaps they were Cathars who believed the physical world was a creation of an evil god and renounced all material wealth. Maybe they were Waldensians who preached that any person, not just a priest, could have a direct relationship with God. Or perhaps their beliefs were even older, a whispered paganism that had never truly died out in the shadowed groves of the forest. To the bishops and the lords in their stone castles, this was not a simple difference of opinion. It was a spiritual contagion, a rebellion that could spread and unravel the entire social and divine order. A village like this was not just living in isolation, it was living in defiance, and defiance could not be tolerated. The official response to such a threat was terrifyingly systematic. A local bishop might dispatch inquisitors whose job was not just to punish but to uncover and extirpate every root of the heresy. They would interrogate, they would demand recantations, and they would identify the ringleaders. For a community found guilty of unrepentant heresy, the sentence could be utter destruction. Its people might be scattered, its leaders burned at the stake, and every physical trace of its existence, the homes, the chapel, the fields, put to the torch. But physical destruction was only the first step. The final, chilling act was the Damnatio Memoriae, the condemnation of memory. This was a deliberate, bureaucratic act of forgetting. Scribes would be ordered to scrape the village name from every charter, every tax roll, and every map. Its land would be reassigned, its history severed. The goal was to make it so that the village had never been, to erase the very idea of it from the world as a permanent warning. This is the silence we are hearing. This is the void we are staring into. The empty space on the map is not an accident, it is a monument to fear. What final, undeniable proof could confirm that this was the village's true fate? The answer may lie in the very earth we have already disturbed, waiting for one last grim discovery. A single lead badge, no larger than a coin, was found half buried near the ghostly outlines of a longhouse. It was a pilgrim's badge, the kind sold at holy sites, but the symbol stamped into its surface was unfamiliar and strange. This small, silent object, discovered by a lone metal detectorist, speaks with a clarity that all the missing documents cannot. It tells us that someone from this village undertook a journey, traveling to a distant shrine and returning with this token of their faith. Yet the unknown symbol suggests this was not a mainstream Christian pilgrimage. It points toward a site of local veneration, perhaps one that church authorities later deemed heretical. This one artifact anchors the entire village back into the tangible world. It is physical proof of a person with hopes, with beliefs, and with connections to a world beyond their forest clearing. The badge hints at a spiritual life that was deeply personal and potentially dangerously unorthodox. What other small treasures might the soil be guarding, each one a potential key to unlocking the village's final days? The discovery of the pilgrim's badge proves this village was not a hermit kingdom. Its people reached beyond the forest, and that means they needed things the forest could not provide. every medieval community, no matter how remote, relied on a few crucial imports. Salt for preserving food and sustaining life was an absolute necessity. Iron was needed for the nails in their homes, the blades on their axes, and the shoes on their plow horses. Even the simple quern stone, the heavy basalt rock used to grind grain into flour, was a piece of technology that often had to be brought from distant quarries. A village that appears in no port records, no market toll rolls, and no merchant ledgers did not magically conjure these essentials from thin air. It operated in the shadows, participating in what historians call the grey economy of the medieval world. Official trade happened in chartered markets under the watchful eye of a lord's tax collector, with every transaction recorded for a cut of the profit. But unofficial trade flourished along woodland paths and at remote crossroads, a silent barter system that left no paper trail. The people of our lost village likely traded for their salt and iron with other isolated settlements, or with itinerant peddlers who knew the secret ways through the trees. They would have paid with something the forest offered in abundance. Perhaps they produced a special, high-grade charcoal crucial for smithing metal, a commodity always in demand. Maybe they harvested rare medicinal herbs known only to local wise women, or they trapped animals for pelts of exceptional quality. These goods could have been traded through a trusted intermediary, a solitary merchant who would then sell them in a formal market far away, completely severing the chain back to the hidden village. This economic invisibility was a deliberate strategy for maintaining their autonomy, but it was also their greatest vulnerability. Their entire survival depended on a few fragile, unofficial connections. If that trusted merchant died, if a new lord cracked down on smuggling in the region, or if a conflict blocked a hidden path, the village lifeline would be severed. The community would not collapse in a single day. Instead, it would have begun a slow, quiet decline. The tools would break and could not be replaced. The salt would run out, making it impossible to preserve meat for the winter. The single, precious quern stone would eventually wear down, making it a struggle to prepare the daily bread. This was not a dramatic ending fit for a folktale. It was a slow fade, a community gradually succumbing to the very isolation that had once been its shield. Could such a gradual economic death also explain the final, peaceful abandonment the archaeology suggests? Tree rings hold a silent calendar, a natural ledger of years etched into wood. If an excavation were to uncover a preserved timber from a house beam or a well lining, scientists could use dendrochronology to read this history. This method, tree ring dating, compares the unique pattern of wide and narrow rings in an ancient piece of wood to a master chronology for that region. Each ring represents 1 year of growth, a wide ring for a good, wet season, and a narrow one for a time of drought or hardship. The outermost ring tells the exact year the tree was felled by an axe. This single piece of data would be a game changer for our mystery. It would give us a firm construction date for a key building, or perhaps a date for a major rebuilding effort after a fire. Suddenly, our village is no longer floating in a vague medieval past. It is anchored to a precise moment in history. Imagine the tree was cut down in the year 1347. We can now cross-reference that date with the known events of that turbulent era. Was 1347 a year of a great famine that swept the land? Was it the very year the Black Death first reached the region? Or was it a time of intense religious persecution when a local bishop launched a violent inquisition against heretical groups? The tree ring does not tell us why the village ended, but it points an unerring finger at the specific pressures it faced. This scientific clock narrows the possibilities dramatically, transforming our search from a broad speculation into a targeted investigation of a single critical period. The very wood the villagers used to build their homes could finally reveal the timing of their story's final chapter. Medieval borders were not clean lines on a map, but vast, shadowy zones of constant tension. Our lost village likely sat within one of these turbulent marchlands, a contested frontier between two rival powers. These were places where the king's law was a distant whisper, and the true authority was a marcher lord, a baron granted near-royal powers to hold the wilderness against enemies. Such a lord would have actively planted settlements like ours as strategic outposts, human watchtowers to secure a river crossing or a vital forest pass. The villagers, in return for land and a degree of freedom, served as a living buffer, the first line of defense. They were pawns in a grand, dangerous game of territorial chess. But what happens to a pawn when the game suddenly ends? If a war was lost or a treaty signed, the border could shift overnight. A village that was once a vital asset to one kingdom could suddenly find itself an inconvenient pocket of the old regime, stranded deep inside the territory of its former enemy. Its continued existence was a political embarrassment and a military liability. The new rulers would not want a community with lingering loyalties to their rivals sitting astride their new supply lines. The simplest, most brutal solution was not to conquer it, but to unmake it. Its land would be absorbed by a neighboring, loyal manor. Its people might be dispersed or absorbed. And every charter, every map, every tax record that proved it was ever part of the old territory would be systematically gathered and destroyed. This was more than administrative tidying, it was a form of historical conquest. By erasing the village from the record, the new lords solidified their claim, airbrushing away any evidence that the land had ever been disputed. In the ruthless politics of the borderlands, a forgotten village was a secure border. This theory perfectly explains the absolute nature of the silence that surrounds our village. Its disappearance was not an accident of plague or a crusade against heresy, though those could have been convenient covers. It was a cold, calculated act of statecraft. The empty space on the map is the ghost of a forgotten frontier, a testament to the day a line moved and a community was sacrificed to the cause of a cleaner, simpler, and utterly fictional history. The very shape of the land tells a story of how these people lived together. Look closely at the ghostly outlines of the village, and you begin to see the social blueprint of the community. The field systems are not a chaotic jumble. Instead, they form a pattern of long, parallel strips, a clear sign of communal farming. Each family likely worked its own assigned strips, but the harvest was a collective effort that bound everyone to a shared fate. This layout points to a deeply ingrained cooperative spirit, a society built on mutual dependence. The houses themselves are not scattered randomly through the woods. They cluster together along a single, central trackway, their doors facing inward toward each other, not outward toward the wilderness. This intentional arrangement speaks volumes. It reveals a people who prioritized community defense and social connection over individual privacy or sprawling homesteads. This was a village that faced the world as one. And then there is the clearing at the heart of the settlement, a level, open space larger than any single homestead. This was likely the village green, the stage for daily life. Here, children would have played while livestock grazed. Here, on long summer evenings, decisions affecting the entire community would have been debated and made. This space is the footprint of their democracy, a place where every voice could, in theory, be heard. All of this evidence paints a portrait of a remarkably cohesive and self-organized society. There is no obvious footprint of a manor house, no grand structure set apart from the others to signify a resident lord issuing commands from on high. The village appears to have governed itself. This very cohesion becomes our most vital clue. A community this tightly knit, this self-reliant, does not simply collapse from within. It does not abandon its homes and fields because of a petty internal squabble. Such a profound and final act of desertion requires a pressure equal to or greater than the social bonds that held it together for generations. The orderly, peaceful layout revealed by archaeology suggests the village was not torn apart by civil war. The houses were not burned. The fields were not left in disarray. This points the finger of suspicion squarely away from internal decay and toward an overwhelming external force. What power could compel a united community to make a collective decision to simply walk away from everything they had built, leaving their quiet, organized lives to be swallowed by the forest? The climate itself can be a slow and silent conqueror. Beginning in the 14th century, a profound climatic shift gripped Europe, a period we now call the Little Ice Age. This was not a single dramatic event, but a creeping change that stretched over generations. Summers grew shorter and noticeably cooler, while winters became brutally long and severe. The weather patterns turned chaotic, unleashing relentless rains that drowned fields and unseasonal frosts that blackened tender shoots overnight. For a sophisticated city, this was a hardship. For a marginal settlement clinging to existence in a forest clearing, it was an existential threat. Their entire world was balanced on the success of a single annual harvest. Imagine watching the sky, season after season, as your carefully tended fields of rye and barley were washed away by downpours or killed by an early freeze. The grain stores meant to last through the winter would dwindle to nothing. The hunger would set in, a constant, gnawing companion that weakened the body and frayed the spirit. There were no supply lines, no relief shipments from a central government. Their survival was tethered directly to the land, and the land had turned against them. After several years of such catastrophic failure, the calculus of survival would have become terrifyingly simple: stay and face almost certain starvation as a community, or leave and scatter into the wider world in a desperate search for bread. This would not have been a decision made in a day. It was a slow, agonizing realization that the home their ancestors had built was no longer capable of sustaining them. The dispersal would have been a quiet tragedy. Families would have gathered their few portable possessions, their tools, and any remaining food, and walked away from their longhouses and fields. They would have sought refuge with distant relatives, or traveled to larger towns where they might find work as laborers, their distinct village identity dissolving as they blended into the anonymous poor. Behind them, the forest did not rush in, it crept. First, weeds would have choked the abandoned vegetable patches. Then, brambles and saplings would have risen in the trackways. Within a few decades, the thatched roofs would have collapsed, and the timber frames of the houses would have rotted back into the soil. The village green, once the heart of their community, would have vanished beneath a new generation of trees. Their story died not with a bang, but with the last elder who could still point to a moss-covered mound and say, "That was where my father's house stood." This theory of a slow climate-induced fade answers many questions. It explains the lack of violent destruction in the archaeological record. It accounts for a peaceful, orderly abandonment. And it shows how a village could be forgotten by official history, simply because there was no one left to remember its name or claim its empty fields. Yet this quiet end still feels like an incomplete answer for a place that was so thoroughly erased. The Little Ice Age affected thousands of villages across Europe, and while many were abandoned, their names often persist in old records as deserted places. Why was this particular village singled out for total oblivion? Did the climate merely provide the final push for a community that was already living on the edge of something far more dangerous? Deep within the nearby peat bogs, a completely different kind of record has been quietly waiting. Palynology, the science of studying ancient pollen, reads this landscape like a biological ledger. By driving a hollow tube deep into the wet, preserved layers of a bog, scientists can extract a core sample, a vertical timeline of the environment stretching back centuries. Each thin, muddy slice represents a different era, and trapped within them are countless pollen grains, each one a tiny, indestructible fossil. These grains tell a story that no human scribe ever could. At the very bottom of the core, in the oldest layers, you would find a predictable mix. There would be pollen from the great forest trees, oak and lime and elm, and from the wildflowers and ferns that thrived in the deep shade. This was the signature of the primeval, untouched woodland. Then, at a specific depth, the story changes dramatically. The tree pollen begins to decline. In its place, a new signature erupts. Suddenly, there is a massive spike in the pollen of cereal crops, especially hardy rye, the staple grain of the medieval peasant. Alongside it appears the pollen of plants like cornflower and chickweed, classic followers of human cultivation, weeds that only thrive in plowed and disturbed soil. This is the village's birth certificate, written in pollen. It marks the exact moment, ecologically speaking, when the people arrived, cleared the trees, and planted their first fields. The land itself bears witness to their labors, but the core sample continues, and the story it tells has an end. Higher up, in a younger layer of peat, the cereal pollen vanishes. The rye and the barley are gone. The pollen of the opportunistic weeds fades away, and slowly, surely, the pollen of the forest trees returns, rising once more to dominance. This is the village's silent obituary. It records the precise moment when the plows fell still, when the fields were abandoned, and when the forest began its slow, patient work of reclaiming its own. This natural archive provides a timeline completely free from human bias or censorship. It confirms the village's lifespan, from its vigorous founding to its quiet end. The pollen does not tell us why the people left, but it tells us without a doubt that they did, and it frames their entire history within the relentless cycle of the natural world. Their endeavor was but a brief interruption in the long memory of the woods. This biological witness raises one final, haunting possibility. If we can match the pollen timeline from the bog with the tree ring date from a timber, we can lock this village story into a precise window of time. What catastrophic event, recorded in the wider historical record, unfolded during those exact years to bring about this ecological and human collapse? A name is the last anchor a place has in human memory. Long after the last stone has crumbled and the last resident has passed away, the name often lingers, whispered in a field boundary or fossilized on a map. That our village has no such echo is one of the most chilling parts of this mystery. In the science of toponymy, the study of place names, this is a profound anomaly. Names are stubborn. A village abandoned during the Black Death might be recorded as a lost or deserted place on later maps, its name preserved as a ghost in the landscape. Even when a settlement vanishes, its identity often survives in a nearby wood called town copse or a field known as Churchfield. Our village left behind no such shadow. Its name was not just forgotten, it was severed. This forces us to consider two unsettling possibilities. The first is that its name was utterly generic, something like Woodcutter's End or the New Farm. If there were a dozen such clearings with similar names across the county, the loss of one would barely cause a ripple. Its identity would have been too weak to survive. The second, more compelling possibility is that the name itself became taboo. Perhaps it was inextricably linked to a tragedy so awful or a shame so deep that the surrounding communities simply ceased to speak it. In the medieval mind, a name had power. To speak the name of a place cursed by God or haunted by malevolent spirits was to invite that same misfortune upon yourself. The name would have been deliberately suppressed, its syllables fading from local dialect until it was as if it had never been uttered at all. This act of linguistic erasure is the final, brutal stage of a community's unmaking. Without a name, a place cannot be prayed for, cannot be remembered in story, cannot be found by descendants seeking their roots. It becomes a true non-place, its story locked away in the silent, stubborn earth, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. The empty fields of Warham Percy in England tell a story of slow economic decline, a narrative shared by thousands of deserted medieval villages across Europe. Its name survives in tax rolls and manorial records, meticulously noted as a place that once thrived and then faded when sheep farming became more profitable than peasant agriculture. This is the normal fate of a failed settlement, recorded with bureaucratic indifference. Our lost village stands in stark opposition to this pattern. Its silence is not the quiet of economic obsolescence, but the profound void of a deliberate purge. When you compare the two, the difference becomes the most telling clue of all. A typical deserted medieval village leaves a paper trail of its death, a chronicle of its diminishing value. Our village leaves no such trail because it was not allowed to die a natural death. It was executed and its records were burned. This act of total historical oblivion is not a symptom of neglect. It is the scar left by a purposeful and powerful hand. To erase a community so completely from memory requires a motivation far beyond mere profit or convenience. It demands a reason so compelling, so threatening to the established order, that the very idea of the village had to be annihilated. This comparative analysis forces a chilling conclusion. The forces that unmade this place were not economic. They were ideological. What specific truth did this village embody that made its complete and utter deletion from history a necessary act of preservation for the powers that be? Medieval law could be absolute and terrifyingly final. A single declaration of outlawry could place an entire community outside the protection of any law. This was not just a punishment for individuals, but a sentence that could be leveled against a whole village for acts of collective defiance. Imagine the consequences of sheltering a band of fugitives, or the entire village refusing to render the annual taxes owed to their lord. Such an act was seen not as simple disobedience, but as a rebellion against the entire feudal order. The legal mechanism for this was stark. A writ of outlawry would be issued, a piece of parchment that effectively unmade a community in the eyes of the crown. From that moment, every person in the village lost all legal rights. Their property was no longer their own, instantly forfeit to the crown or to a loyal neighboring lord. More chillingly, they themselves could be harmed or even killed by anyone without fear of legal repercussion. They were no longer subjects, they were vermin to be eradicated. This legal death would have been followed by a swift and physical one. The Lord's men-at-arms would have arrived not to collect taxes, but to seize the now ownerless land and disperse or eliminate its inconvenient inhabitants. But the final, lasting act was the bureaucratic purge. All prior charters, land grants, and tax records that mentioned the outlawed village would be gathered and systematically destroyed. These documents were the legal soul of a place, and their annihilation was its official death certificate. This judicial process, known as attainder, was the ultimate tool for enforcing conformity. It did not just punish a crime, it erased the criminal's very existence from the public record to serve as a permanent warning to others. The silence we find in the archives is precisely the silence left by such a legal obliteration. A village declared outlaw was not just destroyed, it was unmade, its name scraped from the ledger of the world as if it had never drawn breath. This grim possibility forces us to ask what final, desperate act of unity could have provoked such a devastating response from the powers that ruled their lives. The spectral outline of the village sharpens under the invisible gaze of other remote sensing technologies. Beyond the laser mapping of LiDAR, infrared photography captures a different kind of ghost. From the air, it detects subtle variations in soil moisture and plant health, revealing patterns completely hidden to the naked eye. Where a longhouse once stood, the compacted earth and buried stone foundations might retain water differently, causing the grass above to grow slightly thinner or a different shade of green. Over the old trackways where countless feet compacted the ground, the vegetation could be stunted. This spectral signature, painted in infrared light, traces the village plan in living color, a phantom blueprint drawn by the very land it altered. Meanwhile, a geomagnetic survey scans the ground for the magnetic memory of fire and iron. This method measures tiny disturbances in the Earth's magnetic field caused by human activity. The intense, localized signal from a blacksmith's forge, where iron was repeatedly heated and hammered, would stand out like a beacon. The broader, softer magnetic glow of a domestic hearth, used for cooking and warmth for generations, would mark the heart of a home. Each anomaly is a data point, a digital whisper of daily life. Together, these non-invasive techniques build a comprehensive, three-dimensional model of the settlement without ever breaking the soil. We can now walk through a digital reconstruction of its streets, see the placement of each home, and locate its industrial center. This high-resolution ghost image makes the village's physical reality utterly undeniable, a fact of science and soil. Yet its historical presence remains a profound void, a name erased from every parchment. This is the core of the mystery, the fascinating dissonance between what the Earth so clearly remembers and what history so deliberately forgot. How do we reconcile this undeniable physical proof with an archival silence so complete it feels like a deliberate act of violence against memory itself? Perhaps the most profound mystery is that the villagers themselves orchestrated their own vanishing. The complete absence of violent conflict in the archaeological record suggests they were not victims of a sudden attack. The lack of a mass grave points away from a swift plague. What if their disappearance was not a tragedy inflicted upon them, but a conscious collective choice to opt out of the medieval world? In an era defined by the crushing weight of feudal obligations and the rigid enforcement of religious conformity, the desire for absolute freedom could have been a powerful enough force to make an entire community walk away from everything they knew. Imagine the conversations held in low voices by the hearths or in the center of the village green as the community reached a breaking point. The constant demands of a greedy lord for more grain, more labor, more of everything they produced. The looming threat of a church inquisitor arriving to punish their unorthodox beliefs. For a people who prized their cohesion and self-reliance, the ultimate act of defiance would not have been to fight, but to simply disappear. They could have planned their exodus for seasons, secretly scouting a new, even more remote location deep in the wilderness. Then, in a single coordinated movement, they would have gathered their most essential tools, their seed grain and their livestock, and melted into the forest. To ensure the safety of their new beginning, they would have taken a solemn, communal vow of silence. They would become a new people with a new name, and the secret of their old home would be a story never to be spoken to outsiders. This secret would have been guarded fiercely by their children and their children's children, until over generations, the truth of the old village faded into a half-remembered family legend, a tale of a forgotten home in the woods. This theory turns the entire mystery on its head. The erasure from history was not a punishment imposed by a vengeful lord or bishop. It was a brilliant, desperate strategy for survival, a final declaration of independence written not in ink but in silence. Language itself can become a tombstone. In the quiet backwaters of the local dialect, a single, peculiar word might be the last surviving relic of our vanished village. Consider a specific name for a type of mushroom that grows only in one particular part of the ancient woods, a name that makes no sense in the common tongue of the region. Or a unique term for a terraced field on a hillside, a farming technique long since abandoned everywhere else. These linguistic fossils are not random. They are echoes preserved in the speech of neighboring communities long after the people who coined them were gone. Philologists, the scientists of language, are the detectives who can follow these echoes back to their source. They map the geography of words just as cartographers map the land, tracing the spread and retreat of vocabulary. When they find a word that is an island, a term used only in one small area with no relatives in the surrounding dialects, they know they have likely found a linguistic artifact. This word is a message in a bottle from a sunken culture. It tells us that the people of the lost village had a distinct way of seeing and naming their world. That unique mushroom was important enough to them to deserve its own name, perhaps because it was a staple food or a potent medicine. Their specific farming technique was a clever adaptation to their rugged environment, a solution to a problem that only they faced. The survival of this one word is a quiet rebellion against the total erasure commanded by lords and bishops. It proves that while you can burn parchments and scrape names from maps, it is far more difficult to purge a living word from the mouths of people. The memory of the village persisted not as a grand story, but as a syllable, a breath passed from parent to child over generations, its original meaning fading but its sound enduring. This linguistic ghost does more than just confirm the village existed. It offers a tiny, intimate window into the minds of the people who lived there. What other secrets about their daily lives and their unique knowledge of the forest are still hiding, encoded in the forgotten vocabulary of the land? Fire leaves a distinct and permanent scar upon the earth. In a village built almost entirely of timber, wattle, and dried thatch, a single stray spark from a hearth could have been all it took. A domestic accident on a windy night would have raced through the tight cluster of homes with terrifying speed, a roaring inferno against which the villagers had no real defense. They would have fought with buckets of water and wet blankets, but the outcome was likely inevitable. In a matter of hours, their entire world would have been reduced to smoldering embers and ash. For a remote, marginally productive settlement, such a tragedy could have been its final chapter. The surviving families, now homeless and with nothing but the clothes on their backs, would have had little choice. They would have been absorbed into neighboring villages or taken to the roads as beggars. Their feudal lord, upon hearing the news, might have simply shrugged. The cost of rebuilding such a distant outpost would have outweighed its meager annual income. With a stroke of a quill, he could have written the asset off his books, a minor financial loss unworthy of further official note. The village, emptied of its people and its value, would have been forgotten by bureaucracy within a generation. Yet fire can also be a deliberate and brutal instrument of policy. A punitive raid by a lord's soldiers or the forces of the church would have had a very different signature. This would not have been a chaotic accident, but a systematic cleansing. Men with torches would have moved from structure to structure, ensuring nothing was left standing. The goal was not just to punish, but to terrify and to erase, sending a clear message to any other community that might consider defiance. The archaeological evidence hidden in the soil holds the key to distinguishing between these two fates. A widespread, uniform layer of ash and charcoal, particularly one that covers the entire settlement area, speaks of a single, catastrophic event that consumed everything at once. This points toward a devastating accidental fire, but if that ash layer is concentrated in specific areas, like the entrance to the village or around a central meeting place, and if it is mixed with other signs of violence, like arrowheads or the shattered remains of tools used as weapons, then the story changes. That is the unmistakable signature of a targeted attack, a final conflagration meant to scour the village from the face of the earth. So which was it for our lost community? Did a simple, tragic accident provide a convenient end to a place already living on the edge? Or was the fire itself the intended conclusion, a weapon wielded to ensure its silence forever? The bones would not lie. If a future excavation were to uncover the village cemetery, the skeletons themselves would become our most intimate and honest witnesses. Osteoarchaeology, the science of reading the stories locked in human remains, could tell us the final, unvarnished chapter of these people's lives. The thickness and condition of their bones would speak volumes about their diet. Signs of porotic hyperostosis, a spongy appearance on the skull, would be a clear indicator of chronic anemia, often caused by malnutrition or parasitic gut infections. This would confirm whether their self-sufficient life was a robust one or a constant, grueling struggle against hunger. Healed fractures on forearms or ribs would tell tales of a hard, physical existence, a fall from a tree, a kick from a horse, the inherent dangers of their world. But these healed wounds also show resilience. They are evidence of a community that cared for its injured and allowed them to recover. The most telling evidence, however, would be found in their final moments. The manner of burial is a profound cultural fingerprint. Were the bodies laid to rest in an orderly, east-west orientation, following the Christian tradition with their hands folded in prayer? This would suggest they lived and died within the fold of the mainstream church, making their disappearance even more mysterious. Or were the burial practices unusual? Perhaps the bodies were placed in a north-south alignment or curled in a fetal position, practices sometimes linked to much older pagan traditions. Such a discovery would be a bombshell directly supporting the theory of a community clinging to forbidden beliefs. Then there is the most grim possibility. A single mass grave containing a jumble of skeletons of all ages and sexes would point to a catastrophic single event, and if those bones showed perimortem trauma damage that occurred at or around the time of death, like unhealed sword cuts to the skull or arrowheads embedded in bone, the mystery would be solved. That would be the undeniable signature of a violent end, a raid that wiped the community out in one bloody hour. The silent testimony of the cemetery would finally answer the question that documents and maps cannot. Were these people victims of a slow, quiet decline, or did they meet a swift and terrible fate that someone then worked very hard to make the world forget? We are left holding a basket of scattered clues, each a ghost from a different realm. The lidar outlines a village that once breathed. The tree ring dates its final construction to the edge of a terrible famine. The pollen core records its fields being swallowed by the returning woods. A single pilgrim's badge speaks of an unorthodox faith, and the profound historical silence screams of a deliberate purge. These are not separate mysteries, but pieces of a single, terrifying story. The most plausible narrative is one of a perfect storm. This was a small, fiercely independent community, likely holding beliefs that set them apart from the mainstream church, nestled in a remote forest that was also a contested borderland. For a time, their isolation protected them, but then the climate turned. The Little Ice Age brought years of failed harvests, weakening the village and making it unable to sustain itself. This vulnerability coincided with a shift in political winds, a border conflict that rendered their location a liability to a powerful marcher lord. Whether officially declared heretical or simply inconvenient, they became a target. The end was likely swift. Soldiers or inquisitors arrived not to collect taxes but to erase a problem. the village was destroyed, its people scattered or killed. Then came the final, chilling act, to ensure no one would ever rally around the memory of this place, to solidify a new political border and extinguish a dangerous idea. Every scribe was ordered to scrape its name from every charter, every map, every tax roll. The silence we encounter today is not an accident of time. It is the intended result, the successful completion of a campaign of total oblivion. One community's struggle for autonomy was consumed by the converging pressures of a changing world, leaving behind only the whispers we are now just learning to hear. The story of the time-lost forest village is far more than a historical cold case. It is a profound reminder of how fragile our collective memory truly is, and of the immense power held by a deliberate, crafted silence. This single, erased community forces us to question the very completeness of the historical record we take for granted. We must learn to listen for the whispers and echoes that linger in the empty spaces on old maps, in the gaps between official dates and names. By its stark absence, this village teaches us more about the crushing pressures of medieval life than a dozen well-documented towns ever could. We feel the long reach of feudal and religious authority, the pervasive fear of the other, and the timeless, deeply human yearning for a life of autonomy. Its legacy is a cautionary tale written in negative space, a story of how a community can be unmade, scrubbed not only from the land but from the story we tell about our past. Let this mystery inspire you to look closer at the forgotten corners of your own world, at the local legends and the oddly named fields. History is written not only in the grand monuments that remain, but also in the profound silence of what has been deliberately lost. We would love to hear which theory you find most compelling. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to journey with us into more of history's greatest enigmas. But finding the village location is only the beginning of a modern ethical maze. The very technology that allows us to see its ghostly outline forces a difficult question upon us. Do we have the right to dig? Uncovering this place could be seen as a rescue mission, finally giving a voice to a people who were silenced. We could learn the exact dimensions of their homes, the tools they used, the food they ate, restoring a rich layer of human detail to a story of oppression. Yet this act of recovery could also be the ultimate violation. Those who erased this village did so to bury a dangerous truth, and by exhuming it, we might be trampling on the final wish of the community itself, to be left in peace, their secrets interred with them. To excavate could be to commit the very same act of intrusion that their persecutors began centuries ago, only now with trowels and brushes instead of torches and writs of outlawry. This is not an abstract debate. Imagine the delicate task of unearthing a skeleton. Do we analyze the bones to understand the person's diet and health, or do we respect them as an ancestor who may have chosen this forest as their final sanctuary? Every artifact pulled from the ground carries the weight of this choice. We must ask ourselves if our curiosity, however well-intentioned, justifies disturbing a grave that history itself has tried to seal. The silence that surrounds the village is now a sacred space, a monument to forgetting that we are poised to shatter. What gives us the authority to decide that their long-held secrets are now ours to uncover? This dilemma becomes even more profound when we consider the living. Genealogical research and DNA analysis could potentially identify descendants of those who fled or were scattered. If such people were found, what voice should they have in this process? Would the story of the village belong to them, to archaeologists, or to all of humanity? For a community whose identity was systematically erased, the power to control their own narrative would be a form of justice long delayed, allowing potential descendants to decide the fate of the site. Whether it is excavated, preserved, or left entirely alone, would return a measure of agency stolen from their ancestors. It would transform the village from a mere historical puzzle back into a human legacy. Our search for the truth now demands a new kind of wisdom, one that balances our desire for knowledge with a deep respect for the silence that others fought so hard to create. The final chapter of this mystery is not written in the soil, but in our own conscience, challenging us to listen not only for the whispers of the past, but for the ethical echoes of our